Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of the AuctionChatter podcast and another edition of AuctionChatter, where I'll be joined once again by Moshe Maimon. Thank you, Moshe, for joining me.
Thank you very much. Great to be here again.
This time we'll be discussing another amazing catalog and collection of Genazym, Genazym. Check out the catalog genazym.com, where the link is in the show notes. The auction will be Sunday, February 15th at 8 p.m. in Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim, and 1 p.m. Eastern. As always with Genazym, by the way, just to start off, watch the auction. It's a very exciting, entertaining event, just for entertainment's sake. And obviously, this catalog, as always with Genazym, they don't disappoint. So I told them right when they reached out, I'm like, you guys always have a phenomenal collection, a phenomenal items. So thank you to Genazym for sponsoring this episode of AuctionChatter once again, and we'll dive right into the catalog running through different items. All right, so right in the beginning, there's a number of Bibles. I guess they grouped them together. Lot 1 being the Tanakh of Menashe ben Israel, Menashe ben Yisrael. Lot 2 being the Spanish Tanakh, Amsterdam 1546. And Lot 3 is called the Lambrosio Tanakh in Venice, 1639. I know, Ramesh, I know you've been busy with Tanakh lately. This is something you've been Isaac in. So you have what to say on these. I mean, I'll just say, Menashe ben Israel, there's so much to say, always what to say about him. And his beautiful press. I mean, if anyone's seen his farm, really, I mean, just looking at the picture, you can see the clear, crisp letters, and you can. But Ramesh, what can you tell the listeners about these three different Bibles?
Yeah, the first one, the Menashe ben Yisrael Tanakh. Like you said, first of all, his type that he developed, the Amsterdam type, was very famous. Later, prints in Europe will always boast if they have the Amsterdam type. It's a great type. It's a beautiful type. This particular edition, too, is very, very rare. It's a sefer all the way back from early 1630, 1631 through 35. Thereabouts, it was printed a couple times. And there's different parts of the sefer, different parts of Tanakh. So together, it's called the Amsterdam 1635. But this one is in mint condition. And mint condition means, besides for the actual beautiful type, the beautiful paper, it's preserved really beautifully. There's marbleized paint on the edges of at the time, it was already an exquisite sefer, and it was preserved exquisitely. The binding, an original leather, very fancy binding. The sefer is just in mint condition. Such a sefer, so from 1635, it's a rarity. So it's a absolutely beautiful Tanakh. What's unique about this Tanakh? This Tanakh is a Jewish Tanakh. Surprisingly, today we think of a Hebrew Tanakh as being produced by Jewish people, and most of the time it is. Maybe today exclusively it is, even possibly. I wouldn't vouch for that. But certainly most Tanakhs printed in the modern era are printed by and for Jewish people. But that wasn't the case in the 1600s. You'll see some of the later Tanakhs we're about to look at were printed by and even for Christians. They had a very strong interest in Hebraica, and that was their forte then. But this one was printed by Menashe ben Yisrael, and it appealed to both. He had a very wide readership. It's very possible, just judging by the condition and the preservation of the sefer, that this sefer may have been actually, part of a very wealthy person's library, not necessarily a Tanakh that used in shul, but that only guaranteed its preservation. So that's the Menashe ben Yisrael Tanakh, beautiful edition. Check it out. The next Tanakh is the Spanish Amsterdam 1646 Tanakh. This is it's all in Spanish, and this was for non-Hebrew speaking the Anusim who came to Amsterdam. The Amsterdam community was founded by these Anusim, former conversos, families from Spain who were able to get out, and Amsterdam at the time was probably the only place in Europe where there was religious freedom, at least to an extent that would allow Jews to return to the faith of their fathers. And many conversos who were able to get out, particularly wealthy, well-connected ones, came to Amsterdam and established this phenomenal kahila, the Spanish-Portuguese kahila in Amsterdam, which was wealthy, powerful, and very, very dedicated to their Judaism, although they were the first Bali Teshuvah. And as such, they needed help with reading and understanding Hebrew. So this Tanakh is all in Spanish. It's a beautiful, also an ancient binding, a beautiful Tanakh that they made in Spanish. A very impressive edition. It's a rare and impressive edition. The third one, the Lambrosio Tanakh, is also a rarity. It was printed only one time in Venice, 1639. This Tanakh comes with a Pirush by Rabbi Yaakov Lambrosio, and it has a Haskama from Rabbi Yehuda Arya of Modena, Leon Modena, which tells you that it's the Pirush fits the sensibilities of someone like Leon Marino, who has a Renaissance interest in languages and in art. So the Sefer is this Pirush is a very linguistic kind of Pirush, very dedicated to explaining the Shirashim and the rules of dikduk and grammar and the Taimei HaMikra. There's a little chibur in the Sefer about Taimei Emes, Erev Mishlei and Tehillim, which have their own kind of time. So this was a very an educated provided the reader with the cutting edge education on the background of the Taimei HaMikra, but it also has what appears to be a very traditional commentary based on Radak and other Rishonim about the meaning of the words, but it has a unique feature that it includes, instead of the Laz that you're familiar with from Laze Rashi, which is the Old French, it translates a lot of words into Spanish, Ladino, the Judeo-Spanish, using the Hebrew letters, but the Lazim, it says this word is this Bilaz, that Laz is, in this case, Spanish, so it has a unique designation. This Sefer as also being one of the earliest Ladino Sfarim. Again, it's not written in Ladino, but it contains Ladino translation. So it's this Pirush, I would think, should be of interest today. It was never printed again, but maybe it's worth a second look. It's a rare Sefer and worth taking a look at. The next Sefer is the Hutter edition of the Tehillim. Hutter edition means that this is the Elias Hutter was a printer, and he came up with a device. The Christians were very interested at the time in understanding Hebrew, so he came up with a device to help Christians, and this would help. They actually practice this in a lot of chadorim today, where they have a little, they'll use different color code it, but to help the child understand what's the shoirish of the Hebrew word and what are the prefixes and suffixes which can be added or interchanged. So he developed a device to have hollow letters. With the main letters are used for the shirish, and the hollow letters would be used for the other letters. Again, it's a brilliant device, and he printed it to Tehillim this way in Hamburg, 1602, and this was a by and for Hebraeus, but I'm sure a good plenty of Yidden also benefited from it. And today, it's a rarity and a very important item.
Okay, we'll turn to Lot 5, which is a Chumash Tomer from the Shapira Press in 1864. It actually is an unrecorded edition, as Genazym notes in Lot 5. Go ahead.
Yeah, unrecorded edition means that we know of other prints just like this, but the one for the year 1865, actually 1864, we don't know about it. It's not recorded that they printed one of that year, and for the important reason that none of them survived. These were shul chumashim used in shuls, as you know. If you frequent the shul, chumashim in the shul need to be replaced very frequently. So all the ones printed in the year 1864 had been probably discarded due to being used very, very well. So this is a rare one, not recorded in any of the bibliographies.
Right, thank you. It's a good point to point out when we say unrecorded, what that means. And now you have these large databases, National Library of Israel, and so on. It's very easy to find, easier than back in the day. So that's important to point out. Lot 6 is a set of Mishnayos, Bomberg. It's 3 volumes. Now, when we say set, it's Zroim is the first volume, the second volume is Kodshim, and the third volume is Tyrus. That's it. Those are the only 3 volumes from Shas. The Bomberg, they look like the classical Bomberg Shas, for those that are familiar with it. And these are 3 volumes.
The Zroim and what do you say? Was it Zorim and Taurus are first editions, 1521 and 1522, respectively. The Kodshim one is the 1528 edition. They're not dated, but we know that it's the 1528 edition because of the Sharblat. The original Mishnayos Kodshim were printed in the back of the Gemara without its own Sharblat, only in 1528. So these are first editions for Zorim and Taurus, and the second edition for Kodshim.
Lot 7 is quite fascinating. It's not a sefer, but it's a few leaves of the Talmud in Faro, Portugal, before 1497. So as we know, and those who listen to these AuctionChatter series on the Spanish Jewry, 1492 the Jews are expelled from Spain. 1497 they're expelled / forcibly converted in Portugal. So that's the end of Jewry in Portugal in 1497. Besides the conversos. So there was printing in Portugal, and this is a few leaves of Gemara Brachos that was printed in Portugal in 1497. It's fascinating to see it. You can see the tzura, you can see the print, you can see, as Genazym notes, they used different ksav yad, so there's a lot of differences here, in this one, and also it's very rare that there were about apparently 70 to 80 leaves in this Gemara Brachas, and there are only 90 different leaves are known to have survived. So it's extremely, exceedingly rare. And another thing that's interesting here is that the Rashi is in square script rather than in Rashi script. And what's interesting is that Rashi's script is really a Spanish script.
Right.
So in here you have it in non-Spanish script, so to speak, in the Rashi. It's very interesting to see that. Not what we're used to. But that's, again, these are 3 incunabula fragments, essentially, on Masechta Brachas.
The only way this survived, this was part of a book binding. I know we discussed in the past that
European Genazym.
The European Genazym. So this is also something like that. They took this out of a printed book where the binding was made, to include these pages, and thereby preserving what otherwise they'd be totally lost. Like you said, they only can estimate the number of pages in brachas because they don't have an actual. There is no surviving copy. There's only other leaves in the world, and some of these leaves are unique, totally unique. We don't have them. The other Gersa you're talking about means this is the printing in Spain and Portugal, which is extremely rare. No full volumes have survived, but the Gemaras that they printed in Spain and Portugal were using the Spanish manuscripts of the Gemara. Spanish manuscripts were already recognized by Rishonim. The Ramban, the Rambam even in a place, and the Baal other Rishonim, they talk about consulting, when there's a Gersa problem, they consult, if they can, they consult the oldest Spanish manuscripts they can find, because those are considered to be the most authoritative. They were not used in Italy in the Venice Pensonsino printing of the Gemara. They used the French and German manuscripts, that fit better with the Rashi and the Tosfos they were printing. So this is the Gersois are unique. The only other place they survive besides for these manuscripts are in copies like in the Ein Yaakov. Ein Yaakov also used Spanish manuscripts, although later editions of Ein Yaakov already swapped out the Nuschois for the more contemporary Nuschois.
Lot 8 is Gemara related. So first of all, it's a Gemara, Masechta Gittin Kedushin, Tifosher Tomer, Shapiro Press, but that's not what makes this unique. What makes this unique is that it's full of thousands of glosses of Hagoyis. Rabbi Yosef Zechariah Stern, the Rav in Chavel, who was known as the Sefer Yosef, he wrote many works, Chuvas, other works. He had a lot of polemics with the Maskilim. I think he was very busy with, and so he was a fascinating individual. For those that aren't familiar, Rabbi Yosef Zechariah really deserves his own podcast on AuctionChatter. I mean, he's such a fascinating individual, and you can always check out the Mechon Yerushalayim editions, the various Svarim that he published of his. I don't think they redid everything. I don't think it's from Anagadata. I don't remember others of his. There's many works that he wrote. So this was his personal Gemara with thousands of Hagoyis. So the ones on Gittin have never been published. Kedushin, as Genazym knows, was published, but it's still amazing to see. You just take a picture, and I'm holding the printed catalog in front of me. There's a 2-page spread, and they have it open to 2 pages of the Gemara, and it's literally just, page to page, wall to wall, so to speak, of Hagoyis. Just there's almost no blank spaces.
And what's very interesting, Nachi, is that he refers himself to these Hagoyis as a sefer, as a chibur. It's not, sometimes when you see Hagoyis from a gadol on a sefer, they're just little, notes for himself, essentially. Ayin this, ayin that, or a little change, and then you have to reconstruct what he meant. Sometimes he didn't mean a lot. Sometimes he just meant to fix a mistake. It's not necessarily a chibur which is supposed to interest other people. But in this case, Rabbi Yosef Zechariah refers to his notes as a chibur, and that's because he used the Gemara with particularly wide margins, and he wrote it very clearly. So he meant for these to be preserved, meant for them to be learned, to be eventually printed in all likelihood, and that's why this is he says he has one on all of Shas. I hope those other volumes have survived somewhere and eventually also become public knowledge. But this is, again, like I said, a chibur on Gittin that was never published. It's from Yosef Zechariah, who was the Goin HaGoinim, according to some, very big, very accomplished Talmid Chacham. He was the, Bucky par excellence of his generation, which was blessed with a great many Bekim, including the aforementioned Rogachover and Aderes and others.
Lot 9 is the Amudei Goyla, or the Smak. It's known as the Smak. I don't think anyone really calls it by the name Amudei Goyla. In fact, there's a new book, a new study on it by Professor Judah Galinsky, and so the Pillars of Exile. And it's like, what book is the Pillars of Exile by Isaac of Corbet, Rabbi Yitzchak of Corbet? It's the Smak. This is the first edition, the Kushta edition 1510.
Well, Nachi, I will mention that the title, the Sharblad itself says, it says the Sefer Amudei Goyla Hanikra Sefer Mitzvah HaKotzer.
Right, and that's what it's known as. Everybody calls it Mitzvah HaKotzer. I don't think anybody wants to. Did you see what the Amudei Goyla says on this? Some Sfarim are just like the same thing with the Rambam. I guess you say the Rambam, right? So
right.
Certain Sfarim, that's how it is. So this is a Kushta 1510 edition. Lot 10 is a Maril Sabinata 1556 of, the source of Menogi Ashkenaz. Lot 11, you have Teres Oil of the Ramah, Prague 1570, the Tfus region, with the map, a full map of Beis HaMikdash, which is beautiful to see. The map, Teres Oil, famous sefer of the Ramah, where he says Kabbalah, philosophy is the same thing, two different sides of the coin, so to speak. So this has the very exceedingly rare map.
The map is a pullout. Now, collectors know that pullouts are very, very rare. Bichlal. A lot of times, because they have to. They don't fit the rest of they're not cut together with the pages of the sefer. It's a very large page which is folded up and then pasted into the sefer. So because it's a separate item, if it's opened up too many times, it'll fall out. Sometimes it's because it doesn't fit easily, it falls out. A lot of times people like them because they're unique and they're rare, and they pull them out. But a lot of old Sfarim that had pullouts, the pullouts did not survive even when the sefer did survive. In this case, Genazym mentions that there's only 2 other copies that they are aware of in the world, and I don't think any of them are in public holdings, that have this pullout. This pullout is particularly rare. It may be that they only printed a few of them. It's because it was a high-end item, perhaps the printers only... let's say they made a run of 500 Sfarim, maybe they only printed 50 pullouts, but to date, very few of these have survived. So this pullout is I know it's a very sought-after item in the collector world.
Lot 12, to me personally, is one of the most fascinating items in this catalog, which is the Be'er Sheva, the first edition, Venice, 1614. Be'er Eilenberg, the Talmud of the Lavush and the Sma. This is extremely important sefer. Be'er Sheva is mostly Chedushim on Shas, but what it essentially is, it's on Masechtas that there's no Tosfos, so that there wasn't Tosfos. He says he's writing Tosfos in, so Masech Toharius and various other prokim throughout Shas. And this is his personal copy with the handwritten corrections, glosses, and additions of the Be'er Sheva of Rabbi Yisachar Be'er Eilenberg. So it's quite fascinating to see. It's always, fascinating to see an original, B, an original owned by the author, C, original owned by the author with his own corrections on his own sefer that after he goes, no, let me fix that, let me add this connection, let me do this. So this is, and we're talking about Alex, one of the Gedolei Achrayim. We're talking late, 16th century, early 17th century, very important sefer Be'er Sheva. So this is his personal copy with his Hagois.
Sadly, they mention here, and I know you've mentioned this in the past, Nachi, but very often the sefer, that in order to rebind it and make it fit, they would trim the edges to make them nice and neat and uniform, and not caring that there were some hagoys that are trimmed. So in some of the cases, the hagoy of the author himself were trimmed and shortened, making them hard to read. But still, a lot of them can be deciphered, and they are very important. They mention that the ones just on Maseches Krisus were published in a sefer in the last 20 years or so.
It's a black sefer. I think it's a Lashinsky. Yeah, there's a couple of, I think that's the name, a couple of volumes were printed, a couple of different sections. So some of it was printed, but I don't think all of it was printed. Then we turn to the next lot, which is Shari Tshuva, 520 years old, Tfus Rishon in Fano, 1506. Just as an aside, I talked about this in the print series I did recently with Michelle Margolis. You see the early... I'm not holding it, but I know what these papers look like, these rag paper, and you see the beautiful print. These are pristine. These Sfarim are nicer than Sfarim we have today. When you look at these original prints, and especially these beautiful bindings, that the ones that can be found in Genazym's catalog.
Essentially, they're all handmade. Any sefer you see from 1506, the entire sefer is handmade. It's handcrafted. It's unlike anything you can buy today in a Sfarim store.
Now we turn to the crown jewels of this auction, which is Lot 14 and Lot 15. Lot 14 is Mesilas Yesharim of the Ramchal, the first edition, Amsterdam 1740. And then Lot 15 is a handwritten letter, B'ksav Yad Kodshay of the Ramchal, Moshe Chaim Lutzato. Let's first talk about Mesilas Yesharim. So Mesilas Yesharim is printed in Amsterdam in 1740. And I think it's worth mentioning a couple of things about the Mesilas Yesharim here. And this could be saved perhaps for a future podcast as well, and a complete podcast. But it's worth mentioning that the Mesilas Yesharim was printed in Ramchal. I did a number of episodes on the Ramchal, 2 with David Sklar about the Ramchal and the controversies. And the Ramchal, the bottom line is, left Italy and he makes his way to Amsterdam. He lives in Amsterdam for a couple of years before he eventually makes his way to Eretz Yisrael, where he unfortunately dies at a very young age. While he's in Amsterdam, he was involved in the community, in the yeshiva. And one of the things that he does is, he writes and he publishes Mesilas Yesharim. Now, Mesilas Yesharim, this edition, as we have it, is not the way that Ramchal actually originally wrote it, which we can get to, we can talk about that in a minute. The way he wrote it, actually, Machon Ofek has published many, many editions of the way that it's written in the Seder Avikuach. It's a Q&A, it's very popular, Kuzari and those type of things. That's the way he originally wrote it, and the Ramchal's manuscript survived and it surfaced in Russia. And that's been printed. This one there is no manuscript of, but this original edition was printed. So the original was, as it says, was Huvel Beis Hatfos, Rabbi Yaakov Basan, Yaakov ben Avram Basan, no relation to his Rabbi Rishaya Basan, and Rabbi David ben Rofol Mildola. So they printed this, they were together with the Ramchal in 1740, and obviously the Sefer took off. This is one of the classics, one of the most important, one of the most well-used Muslims farm in the yeshiva world, and the world in general. Now, it's interesting to note in this first edition, a couple things. First of all, the haskamas on this are not from rabbis that you probably heard of. There's a dual haskama from Rabbi David Yisrael Atias and Rabbi Yitzchak Chaim Ibn Dana de Brito, two of the rabbis in Amsterdam. Amsterdam is, I've talked about Amsterdam on the podcast previously. Amsterdam is a community, S&P community, Spanish-Portuguese community, former conversos, Western Sephardim, if you will, and this is the community that he ends up settling in. The second haskama is from the Rav Hamuvok Av Bezdin Varam Umayrit Tzedek B'Kal Kodesh Nefutzas Yehuda Asher Be'ir Bayonne. Bayonne, where? Not New Jersey, France. Who is that? Rabbi Rafal Moldola, the author of Shal Shuvas Mayim Rabbim. Incidentally, not reprinted. Important Shuvas Sefer. Now, the editors are Rabbi Yaakov Basan and Rabbi David Moldola, Rabbi Rafal's son. So they're the editors of this Sefer. Now, Rabbi Yaakov Basan, there's a quite late, there also are those haskamas plus introductions. What's actually sad is that if you look at a lot of Mesilas Yesharams today, they deleted this material as if it doesn't belong in there. I don't know why that was the case. It definitely should be in the Sefer, and you can actually glean some really important, fascinating things. And the original here in the Genazym catalog has this information, meaning in this edition, so you should have it. One of the things that Rabbi Yaakov Basan says when he's talking about it, he talks about the Sefer. I think that's interesting to point out. I'm not going to read the whole, it's lengthy. They both have like 2 or 3 page introductions. But he says, V'hineni modia, and behold, I want to say, L'chol Yorei Shamayim, anyone that's a Yorei Shamayim, Sheroi, it's proper for him, Likrois B'Sefer Zeh, to read this book, Lepachis, at a minimum, Koidim Yamin Aroim, before Yamin Aroim, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, Kedei, in order Sheyeda Ha'oifen Ha'amiti, you should know the proper way, Liknois Hamidois Hatoivois, to come and to know the proper midois, Ulesrachik, and to distance yourself, Min Hamidois Hamagunas, the bad midois, Kiboy Yimsoi Mergoya Lenafshay, etc. And he goes on. There's more. Saying he has a little poem. They were very into poetry then. That's one thing that's worth mentioning. Now, Rabbi David Moldola, incidentally, in his intro, he has a lot of intros, a lot of things that he edited. He was a big editor. And one of the things that he writes is, in general, he talks about other works. Some of them are too Kabbalistic. Some are too kind of esoteric, not in the Kabbalistic sense out there. And so this is like a simple, easy, clear sefer. You can read it and you can understand it. And it's short and it's to the point. Another thing that he says, and this is kind of now become famous, but I believe he's the first one that says it. He says, Kyoish Moshe, and the word Moshe is in bold. Hadarhu l'chol hachasidim vayesharim, bold again. V'shemi Moshe ve'ad bold Moshe like kam chacham ke Moshe, which is in bold. Le ha'ir hameir eni Yisrael b'toiras emes v'chukim yesharim. He says, V'ani etin hayda, and I want to give thanks al chelki lefnei melech v'sarim. Al kol asher gamalani v'zikeni les aseh because he wants to give thanks that he was able to work on this sefer, and he thanks Rabbi Yaakov Basan, and he keeps talking about it. It says and that just like he was zoich sheshkem, he's giving himself a bracha essentially. Zikeni lehagia u'lahoitzil ares sefer hatoira, this sefer hazois asher sidar Moshe lebnei Yisrael b'sedarim. He says therefore he's zoich to do more as far. And there's another poem, and there's some other interesting things, and so on. Now the Ramchal has a chasima. Ramchal has a postscript to the Sefer. And the postscript is quite fascinating. It says, Amar Machaber, and he says, Apam oides Hashem. I want to give thanks to Hashem. And this may have to do with the fact that the other Svarim, he was kind of banned from printing, he had to bury them, they were burned. Unfortunately, we lost many of them due to the controversy. So now he's giving thanks, he's allowed to print this. Va'azamra asher adhena azarun rachamov lahoitzi la'ar sefer zeh mesilas yesharim. I was able to print Mesilas Yesharim. Asher, and he says, L'hisplamid boy chabarativ. I taught it to teach, U'lahoyel, and to help people, and so on. Skip ahead to the next paragraph. I think is an important paragraph for those. This is a hypothesis and a theory that, just a hypothesis that I have, and I know Moshe has, and I know some other people have, but it's worth mentioning. V'chuas chein chein mimeni. I want to give thanks. V'yisor v'sa ish, asher kalavavi midushasi u'ben groini. Fancy language. Atara l'roishi v'choisim al yadimini. So on my right hand, zedoidi v'zerei. All according, from Psukim Malitza. Rebbe Alufi umiyudi harehu chacham hanale k'mrav Rav Rabbeinu Yaakov ben Rabbi Yaakov Rav Avram Basan Neiroi. Asher nichnas ba'oiva shel kaira, he entered into the oiva shel kaira, liz chusein mi, to be mazake me, bedavar hazeh with this thing, mitchila ve'ad soif, from beginning to end, lahatvis to print, ulahagia, and to edit, ulahashlim, and to complete. Kol hamalacha, all the work, b'sholem shebefnim, and the best shlem was the most completeness. Umishaneu, and his second, noida b'sharnim shmoi, is well known. Hamehulul b'tishbachaisav, many praiseworthy is he, even imuki ima, and his depths with him. Zoriz, he's a Zoriz, v'niskal atoiv, and he's remembered for good. I'll call Magi's farm. He's the best editor you could ask for. Magia is, he would check the letters, and he did more than, he was the best editor you could ask for. Ish moir b'malachta, a quick person, an expert in his work. Ben hachachamim morim shvivcha, everybody ben the chachamim says, wow, this is a great man. Harehu hachacham hanala kamorino Rav Rabbeinu David ben, the son of Rav HaGodl hamufla Rav Fromel right? Yivarich Hashem chelam upoyel yideim. Hashem should their work of their hands. B'chol asher yifnu yaskilu simchas oilam tiyah lahem yispu banav v'yichiyusum leileim koi divrei atzoyer Moshe ben Rabbi Yaakov Chai Lutzato. So this is how he ends off. Now, I think the hypothesis here is that we have the Ramchal's manuscript. He wrote it originally as a Q&A. Didn't write it originally this way. There are two editors that have lengthy introductions. He thanks them for their completeness and their editor work. As anyone who knows how Sfarim works, or Moshe here can tell you, works at a press, editors have a job in a press. And some of it is just making sure there, in those days, especially in Magia, you're making sure there's no mistakes. When the sheets come off of the print, go back and listen to the AuctionChatter print series, you make sure there are no errors, and that's why you see sometimes variations in different editions. There's that. There's also editing, which is tightening up language, adding parts, changing things. And there's also the open question of who changed the book from the Q&A to the way that we have it. And, Genazym quotes in the catalog, the Vilna Gaon said that for the time of its appearance, a new light appeared upon the face of the world, and he stated that there was not a single superfluous word within it. We all know this is Shiva Bachrim. Where this member of the Vilna Gaon is, I don't know. I don't know if anyone knows. This is the Shmuah. The question is, and I will just leave the hypothesis, I will say I told this to Reish Kol, and he got very angry about to hear this. Did the Ramchal write it this way that we have it, or was Rabbi Dovin Moldol and Rabbi Yaakov Basan responsible for the editing complete book that came out of the Ramchal? And is the Ramchal alluding to that in his Chasima? So, Ramesha, I'll turn it over to you to add anything you want to add to this.
Yeah, I'll say like this. There was I think most Sfarim that were printed and published then did not have the same kind of editing that modern standards now require. The industry had not developed to the point where there was already a standard of writing that people were expected to adhere to. Pretty much people wrote whatever they wrote, and that's the way it was. If it was unreadable, then they would hopefully have someone else work with them. But it's not like the printing press itself employed regularly editors, which is why they don't use the word editor here. They use the word magia. Magia, like you said, it's checking the leaves as they come off the press. It's also the zetzer. We know the infamous Bacher HaZetzer. The zetzer is the one who clamps it down with a big zetz. That's what presses the letters with the ink on the parchment or on the
But
paper.
that was the Bacher HaZetzer, not the Magia. The
Right.
different job in the press.
Right. But it's these are the people who worked in the press. So the Magia would be the checker. He had to be someone who actually knew something, versus the Zetzer who knew nothing. The Zetzer was typically an Amarz, and that's why they always blame the Zetzer. If there's a mistake there, blame the Zetzer. If it's right, thank the editor. So, but the editor wasn't usually a copy editor working on the language. That wasn't typically what they did. But like you said over here, it's Omer Darshani. If you look at the title page featured here on the catalog, you'll see their names are just as big as Ramchal's names. They're almost credited the same way Ramchal is. Ramchal himself credits them. They take a lot of credit. Yet, still in all, I will point out, at least in the case of Rabbi Dovin Meldola, we have other Sfarim from him. I don't know, do we have any other Sfarim from Rabbi Yaakov Basan? He edits other Sfarim. We see his name, but do we have any of his own Chiburim?
I'm not sure offhand about Rabbi Yaakov Basan, Moldola for sure. And I do want to add one, but to jump into your thought. Exactly. The page says, Huva lebeis hatzvos, bought to print, v'huga, and edited Ramagia, be'ion nimrotz. And it's like great ion. Al yedei achacham Rabbi Yaakov Basan, u'b'shnei achacham Rav David Moldola. So that's right. Worth pointing out. It doesn't, and I'm familiar with Sfarim Amsterdam, many are, doesn't always say that. Now, there is another theory. It could be because of the controversy. They were trying to push it away. And I've asked Dr. David Sklar why Mesilas Yesharim, why the Q&A wasn't printed. His hypothesis in theory is that there was something in there that would have rocked, the boat again, and he would have gotten the Ramchal in trouble. So again, it could be the Ramchal just changed it, and they had to play up the others involved and try to downplay the whole situation. But okay, continue.
Yeah, but in either way, I think, but still, the fact does remain the Vilna Gaon's observation, where it's Mipia Shmuel, of course, like you said, but that observation it's not just the Vilna Gaon who said it; it's also attested to by people who learned the Sefer. The Sefer is written in a beautiful, eloquent Hebrew. There are. Of course, there's superfluous words wherever, but it's not the Tanakh. But it does read in an extremely tight syntax. It is the wording is great. So even if David Meldola and Rabbi Yaakov Bassan took an active role in forming the Sefer we have now, I'm sure it was with working together with Ramchal. Also, the structure of the Sefer is it follows Rav Pinchas Ben Yair, the way things are broken down. There is a lot of, even though it's not the original, I'm sure it has the imprint of Ramchal's genius and Ramchal's style here.
Also, Ramchal, nothing in his Our Asgama, was a wonderful writer. We were talking about one of who came out of Italy. You look at any of the Ramchal's farm. This was what Ramchal is known for. His time of Rabbi Yitzchak Cantarini, who was an expert writer himself. I mean, his farm, impossible to read. There's so much Melitza there. Ramchal was such a professional writer that, it wouldn't need this. But again, I don't know what that means. Just putting out a hypothesis, not saying anything. This is the first edition. Beautiful copy of the first edition of Ramchal. It was just an opportunity for us to talk about Mesilas Yesharim, but I don't think we've done so on the podcast. And I'm sure if anybody has any comments or hate mail, they can send it to us and email us.
They can send it to Nachi.
Yeah, send it to me, right? Okay. The next lot, Rashi, I'll let you talk about, is lot 15, is the Ksav Yad Kodshoy, a letter of the Ramchal. Now, this letter, it was printed. This letter comes from the Igros Ramchal, the manuscript that this is in you can check it on the Shriki edition of the Igros Ramchal, Igeris 84. That's all the letters that were involved, many of them to Rabbi Shai Basala. So this letter is Ramchal's Rebbe. And so that's where this letter comes from.
These letters are fascinating. Because every single side of the Ramchal is on display in this letter, as well as the attitude of his Rebbe towards him. In the Shariki edition, he highlights the godless of Ramchal by noting that the Rebbe himself sometimes doubted the Talmud. Because even the Rebbe who supported him through thick and thin, but he had some very harsh words of criticism, which he did not spare from the Ramchal. So the Sefer is an amazing Sefer, the back and forth. You also see 24-year-old Ramchal holding his own against the critics and even to his Rebbe, always written with the greatest respect. But even with the respect, he writes with a confidence that shows we're talking about a rare genius who's very aware of his abilities. And this particular letter here, which is letter 84 in the collection, is one such amazing letter because at the age of 24, the Ramchal, kind of the roles are reversed here. The Ramchal is schooling, he's schooling his Rebbe. His Rebbe, who acknowledges, he acknowledges readily in the letters to younger Moshe Chaim, the Rebbe, Rabbi Shai Bassan, says, I understand that you have a phenomenal mastery over Kabbalah, and he asks Ramchal to share some of what he knows. And this is one such letter. It's a two-sided letter full of Kabbalistic secrets and expositions that the young 24-year-old Ramchal is sharing with his elderly and accomplished Gadol Hador Rebbe. So it's a very rare item. You don't see this every day. You don't see letters of Ramchal signed, dated, a full letter of Ramchal. It's a unique item that doesn't show up every day at auction.
And currently, at the date we're recording this, I'm sure it's going to go up, and it's a bid of $270,000 for this letter. So it will go up. This is undoubtedly the crown jewel of this collection. Lot 16 is Yeshev V'Shorish Avoda, the first edition, 1782, a rare edition. Lot 17 is Ben HaMelech VaNozir, Kushta 1518. Ben HaMelech VaNozir is a wisdom and Musar presented as a dialogue. And so, again, this is a very interesting old-style sefer. I don't know how well used Ben HaMelech VaNozir is, but at one point this was a classic. This was an extremely used book, Ben HaMelech VaNozir.
It was such a bestseller that this is not even its first Gilgul. This sefer came from, some say it came from Tales of Buddha, and then which was later translated and adapted in each culture in its own language. Each nation put its own little twist on it. The version we have is an adaptation of the version before it, which is the Arabic version. But it's a phenomenal Musar Sefer. It should be very interesting today if someone would put it out in a way that explains people what's going on, because people aren't used to this kind of allegorical Musar Svarim. But it's also, like you mentioned earlier, it follows the dialogue form, which was common in the times of Rishonim. It's a dialogue between a Ben HaMelech, the prince of this Gentile king, who discovers the ways of wisdom from some Nazir, and then the king is upset about it, and draws the Nazir into dialogue. So it's wisdom versus materialism, and brought out poetically by Rabbi Avram Bar Chesdoi. The Sefer went through different Gilgulim, named and different Gedolim were credited with it. I think at some point somebody credits Rabbi Avram Ben Rambam for it, and I still get questions about that because of my work with Rabbi Avram Ben Rambam. Did he really write it? And of course he did not. But any Sefer that was around in Arabic usually gets associated with a great figure from the Arabic world. In this case, it's Rabbi Avram Bar Chesdoi, who was a very great figure in Andalus, in Muslim Spain, who wrote a lot of works on astronomy and other works on theology and important svarim. So this is one such very important sefer. This is the Kushta print. Kushta prints are known to be very unique, very rare. Kushta 1518 is to find a full sefer from Kushta 1518 is not at all common, and here you have one, a very classic, beautiful edition of that sefer.
Yeah, I think Genazym is the one who always has all the kushtas, because they have all, like the next one. We have another one we already had before. Now we have another one, Derech Emunah. The first is in Kushta 1522. Derech Emunah of, not Reb Chaim Kanievsky, but Derech Emunah from Bibago, famous, important work of philosophy. Then there we have another Kushta, which is Reb Saadia Gaon, the first edition of Sefer Emunah's V'deis, of Reb Saadia Gaon, very important classical Sefer. La 20, you have a Sefer Perech Levonoin, royal blue pages. I think we talked about, sometimes they would print custom runs, and so this was a royal blue pages, which is and wide margins. Lot 21, a letter by Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz, handwritten and signed by Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz.
Mic drop.
Well, I think a number of them in here, it's like, that's what it is, and we're going to get to the Neidim Yehuda next, and Shmuel Landau, and all that.
Right.
Again, I mentioned at the top, it's a Genazym catalog where, we do a number of these auction chatters, and many of them have very nice things, but you do Genazym, and it's like a whole nother level where you're looking at it, you're like, okay, now what do I got? I have like Staviyad the Ramchal. Now I'm going to have first edition Nikush to this. Now I'm going to get a handwritten letter signed by Rabbi Eibshitz.
Phenomenal item, yeah.
So that is that. Then you turn to the next lot where we mentioned a lot 22. It's Tor Barekes, the first edition Amsterdam Tuf Yud Daled. So in and of itself, it's a nice item. Tor Barekes is a Reb Chaim Cohen of Aram Tzova, Talmud of of Aleppo, that is. He's a Talmud of Reb Chaim Vital. It's a Kabbalistic commentary on Shulchan Aruch, which is it's interesting. First of all, the Sefer itself. Then you have it's signed. It was owned by the Neidim Yehuda and his brother. So you can own a Sefer owned by the Neidim Yehuda. Then we get Lot 23, which is a famous kuntris. I believe it was printed of Shmuel Segal Landau, which is, I don't think we're going to have time to go into the whole controversy, but after the Neidim Yehuda passed away, there was a big controversy about who should take over as the Rav. And I think, Moshe, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that there wasn't a Rav, the Rav position. I think Shmuel Landau and Belazar Fleck, I think they shared like Rav Bezdin. There wasn't, I think till Shir, he was the next real Rav there, Shlomi the Rabbi. But I think otherwise there was this, because of this controversy, they weren't. It
was always their head of the Bezdin was essentially the Rav, and Rav Shmuel Landau shared that duty. I think there was a rotation or they shared it in some other capacity.
So this details that you can buy it. It's I think 13 pages, 13 written pages.
So you said it was published. The last 2 pages in this kuntris were not published. That has additional information about the controversy, which revolved around the will of a benefactor left a fund to support Talmidei Chachamim, and the question was, can these Talmidei Chachamim, do they have to devote themselves just to learning, or are they also allowed to take public positions? The public position that they saw was in conflict with the Bezdin of Reb Shmuel Landau, and that created the whole friction. So there's some more information that is not printed in this kuntris.
Correct. Only part of it was, and maybe this is not so well known, and it's an autograph of Reb Shmuel Landau, so quite a fascinating item. Lot 24 is a kuntris of manuscript chedushim of the Ksav Sofer. A bunch of kisvei yad this year that are interesting. Lot 25 is mostly unpublished, a Ksav Yad of Rabbi Gedalia Lipschitz. So, which is a big, there's I think 3 volumes here, this manuscript. 900 pages.
Yeah, 4 volumes. It's 4 volumes in manuscript. 4 manuscript volumes of chedushim on Shulchan Aruch from Rabbi Gedalia Lipschitz, the famous Rabbi Gedalia Lipschitz from the Get of Cleve controversy, and the father of the Tiferes Yisrael, Big Gadol.
Now, continue on, there's a letter from the Tiferes Yisrael, which is the next lot, Lot 26. Lot 27, there's a Ksav Yad autograph, more than one, autograph Chuvas, 8 pages of the Karnei Re'im, Aaron Moshe Toivish, Taubis. He's the author of the Kanir Lot 28 is a Ksaviyad, a letter of Rav Shlomo Kluger about leadership, talking about his leadership. Then, so there's a couple of Kisviyadas there. Again, very interesting Kisviyadas. Each of them we can spend a lot of time on. Lot 29, you have a Noam Elimelech Slavita, 1794, so an early Noam Elimelech. Then there's a handwritten autograph letter from the Hilik Sasaver, Moshe Udleib Sasaver, which is Lot 30. And
which also carries an opening bid of 350,000 smackers.
Well, this is now we're into Hasidic stuff. Now it's a whole other thing. You see that can go for more money than the Ramchal's Ksaviyah. That's all you need to know when we look at the market of Hasidus. Is just I don't know what the right word is, how we describe it, what the right adjective is. Lot 31, you have a manuscript of the Yismach Moshe. Lot 32, you have a tshuva of Rabbi Yoel Tadelbaum of Satmar, the Satmar Rebbe, which is interesting as well.
And not only is it interesting, but the catalog has a very interesting picture of Rabbi Yoelish visiting the home of Saliman Sassoon, which is a very different world background. But here they are visiting together in London.
Lot 33, a letter of Cheskel Shraga of Shinova. Lot 34 is a Baruch Halberstam. You have there's a lot of Kisviyadas this time. I think more often, if I'm remembering correctly, than Genazym usually has from Hasidic Rebbe's. Lot 35 is of David of Kashanov. There's a whole bunch of other ones. There is a Lot 37 is the first edition of Tver Shalem of Radomsk, which is 1867 to 1869. Then there's a couple of other ones. I think we should run ahead. Lot 40 is another one. This is. Now it's interesting. I do want to point out they had Genazym listed as Tzaddik HaKohen Gadol Lublin, Kohen Gadol Lublin, called to supply kosher food for Jewish soldiers, signed by Tzaddik HaKohen Lublin and others. I do want to mention who the others are. When I posted it on the AuctionChatter WhatsApp, I wanted to make sure the others are not like some slouches. I know Genazym did it because Tzaddik is Tzaddik, but the others are Reb Shneir Zalman of Lublin,
the Teres Chesed,
and that was very famous. And then the other one is Rabbi Eger of Lublin, the Rebbe of Lublin. He is the Rabbi Eger's son and the great grandson of Rabbi Kiva Eger. So the other ones are no slouches either. And this letter is signed by all three of them. And of course, number one, you have Reb Tzaddik, and it's asking to give food again for Jewish soldiers in the army.
Yeah, what's interesting also is the relationship that they all had. The Teres Chesed is the Rav of Lublin. The Rav is not the Rebbe, and Lublin is interesting in this sense that it has a very big Hasidus, the Lubliner Hasidus, which was Rabbi Eger started it, the Rabbi Eger's son that famously and started, but he headed it, and then this is his grandson. But this Rav, the Teres Chesed, is responsible for the preservation of the Hasidus being led by this Rabbi Avram Eger and Rabbi Tzaddik HaKohen. He was very influential in getting them to continue. So these are the three main leaders of the Jewish community in Lublin, the Rav of Lublin and the two Hasidic leaders there, which is Rabbi Tzaddik HaKohen. And like you said, Nachi, it is rare to see actual writing of Rabbi Tzaddik, and that is what is probably for collectors that is the most attractive Hasidim here. Though by no means do we want to say the most important, but certainly very interesting.
Lot 41 is the personal Zohar of Bereshis of Reb Shaila of Kerestir, signed by Reb Shaila. It was interesting about this is the opening bid of $12,000. I think last I checked, a bid of $19,000. But Genazym has estimate as star. The other ones have an estimate. I don't know what someone's going to pay for Reb Shaila's Zohar. Now we know Reb Shaila and Kerestir is booming, and everyone's going to Kerestir. So what would someone pay for Reb Shaila's Zohar signed? Reb Shaila Steiner. There it is. Lot 42 is a letter by Rabbi Avramela, the son of Reb Shaila. So you can have the son, and then we turn to Lot 43 is the Zohar of Shapira Press Slavita. A couple of other, here there's a Kamea, and Lot 46, a fascinating Kamea. Lot 47 is a manuscript of Reb Chaim Modai of Izmir, hundreds of Hagoyis on Shulchan Aruch Choshim Mishpat.
These Hagoyis are Hashlomis. The catalog here has a very good description. They describe it as the work of the Knesset HaGedolah. The Knesset HaGedolah was, of course, a very, very famous, important work on Shulchan Aruch because it makes Knesset HaGedolah like its name. It collects all the other tshuvas and other important pirushim said on the Shulchan Aruch. So 100 years later, this is Reb Chaim Modai, also one of the Gedolei Hador in the Sephardic world. He was originally a shliach from Eretz Yisrael, and he eventually becomes the the chief rabbi of Izmir, one of the most important cities, a city renowned for its scholarship. And in that capacity, he sits and he writes about the year 1760. He takes a copy of Shulchan Aruch and he fills the margins with references to encyclopedic references to other tshuvas and other important svarim. Some of the volumes were published. The one on Choshen Mishpat was never published. It may not have been known, but it's this. The catalog says it's an important discovery they made researching this item, and they discovered the long lost Choshen Mishpat volume from Reb Chaim Oidoi's work.
Lot 48 is a Kabbalistic siddur for the entire year, written and edited by Reb Sasa Mordechai Shenduk, who was a big Mekubal. I believe Avat Shalom put out a volume with 3 of his different Svarim from manuscript a few years ago. And what's also interesting about this, that this very copy, was owned by the Ben Ish Chai and Chama Yosef.
That's right.
So not only was it written by the great Mekubal, Reb Sasa Mordechai Shenduk, you also have it owned by 2 other great Gedolim.
And handwritten Kabbalistic Siddurim in and of themselves are very important rear items.
Lot 49 is a fascinating item. I think to us, I mentioned the other ones that Beersheva jumped off the page, but maybe this is the one that is most fascinating to us, Moshe, because this one is it's a really historical document. It's the Chidah. The Chidah, as we've discussed, Magal Tov. We only did part 1. We never did part 2.
That's right.
But the Chidah went on Shlichus twice. He went out as a Shadar. He was a Shliach from Eretz Yisrael to collect money. So when you went out, we still see it today, right? Someone comes from Eretz Yisrael collecting, and they have now they get a Tudah from your local town maybe, but back in the day, they didn't know they were. So they would get a signed document saying this person was appointed, and it would be signed by the Rabbanim. The document appointing the Chidah, the Shadar from the Rabbanim of Chevron, because he went for Chevron in 1752, is Lot 49 in the Genazym catalog. How amazing is that?
This is what starts the whole career. This letter is addressed. Now, what's different than today's letters are just general. They're addressed to the general public. In those days, the Shadar had a lot of letters addressed to specific communities, important communities. The letter was specifically addressed to them, and that's how they would know it's authentic. So this is the address to the city of Modena in Italy. And Chidah describes getting there in 1753. He starts his journey in 1752. And this letter in hand is presented to the leaders of Modena when he gets there in 1753. He describes seeing different things in 1753 in Modena. One of them, I think, we mentioned earlier, Rabbi Arya Leon of Modena. The Chidah saw a copy of the Sefer with a retraction. Leon Modena famously doubted the existence of Gilgulim. But the Chidah saw a copy of his Sefer with a retraction. He probably saw that in Modena. He says other Svarim he saw there as well. So, like you said, it jumps off the page because this is the letter. We discussed the first journey. This is what kicks off the journey. This is the letter that starts the whole ball rolling and starts the whole career of the Chidah, essentially.
Lot 50 is a historical peace agreement between the Prushim and the Hasidim in Eretz Yisrael, 1829. This is for a different podcast. That is a fascinating time period to discuss. What was going on in Eretz Yisrael. Goldhaber is a real mumcha in this. What's interesting about this letter is signed by Rabbi Chassida and Rabbi Sol Shklov and others. So this is a fascinating document. And by the way, related to this is the next lot, a massive archive of historical documents, 19th century Tzfas, is lot 51.
The letters from the mandate, letters from the Arabic, from the Arabic government, from letters from all over the Goyla, censuses, distribution of funds. It's over 1,000 documents detailing the life from an administrative standpoint of the Hasidic community in Tzfas. You can probably write book after book just from what you'll find in this lot.
Lot 52 is a letter, Ksav Yad of Moses Montefiore, Sir Moses Montefiore, saving Damascus Jewry, 1860. So I think what's more famous is 1840 is the blood libel in Damascus, which he also was involved in. This is later on where Genazym lays out the story where the Jews were carrying out massacres of Christians, and then it ended up, everything always ends up against the Jews, right? So somehow the Jews ended up in the middle, and so Sir Moses had to step in and had to help, and this was a letter in his manuscript that he sent.
This letter is sent to the chief rabbis of Baghdad, where he reports back on the success of his mission. What's beautiful about this is the letter it's so original. It has the original seal, Montefiore's wax stamped seal on the letter. They have it's a historical item, and also all those little kind of ephemera make these collectibles even more treasured than they would otherwise be.
Lot 53 is the will of the Chavetz Chaim. So his handwritten tzava, but this one has a bid already of $200,000.
Wow.
Listen, it's the will of the Chavetz Chaim. It's handwritten. It's a fascinating document as well.
Yeah, this document, the Chavetz Chaim himself details his life. It's the purpose of the will is to establish the yeshiva on a firm footing for after when he would no longer be there. He writes this will is written in 1926, but in the course of writing his will, the Chavetz Chaim was always thanking Hashem for everything. He's always thinking about Hashem and always serving Hashem. So in his will, he thanks Hashem for having this chus to be able to live the life that he lived, and he highlights the sign points of his life. He highlights being born in 1838 in Zettel. He highlights establishing the yeshiva in 1869, writing this farm. He said, Baruch Hashem, Hashem gave me the schus to help the Jewish people and prevent them from speaking Lashon Hara with the publication of a sefer of Chavetz Chaim and Shmir Salash in 1870 and 1872. He thanks Hashem for giving him the schus of a son-in-law like Rav Tzvi Hirsch Levinson. He says, Baruch Hashem, I was able to marry off my daughter to a goyin and a tzaddik. And then he writes in this letter, he makes like a little carrot, and on top of goyin, he says, goyin b'toira. You know, that's important for the Litvish Chavetz Chaim. He's a goyin b'toira of Tzvi Hirsch, and he's a tzaddik, and through his efforts, the yeshiva grew and grew and grew and blossomed and prospered. Baruch Hashem, the yeshiva is where it is today. Reb Tzvi Hirsch died during the Chavetz Chaim's lifetime. It's his son, so he entrusts the administration of the yeshiva to Rabbi Shua Levinson and Rabbi Eliezer Kaplan, who's married to Levinson. He married into the family. So these are the two are going to be the administrators of the yeshiva. He says, Baruch Hashem, I married off my daughter to Reb Mendel Zaks. He's a very capable Rosh Yeshiva. He's going to assist Reb Naftali. Reb Naftali Trupp is still alive. Reb Naftali died in 1929. More on that later. But he has Reb Mendel and Reb Naftali will say the shiurim, and these are going to be the administrators of the yeshiva. This is the will of the Chavetz Chaim, which is fascinating because of the way he details his life. Also because it's geared to the very last of what was important to him. What jumped out to me, I had recently been involved with another private collection, and in that private collection, I saw something astonishing. On the one, I saw a kol koira, which is a rear kol koira from the Radner Yeshiva after the Chavetz Chaim had passed away already. And in this kol koira, that these administrators of the yeshiva are saying, the Chavetz Chaim left us with the yeshiva. All donations should be sent here to the yeshiva. So you say, what's going on? Why? Where else would they send them? And then I saw another letter in this collection, which sad letter, but it's Reb Chaim Oizer writing to the Agudas HaRabbanim in New York, and he writes that there's a son of the Chavetz Chaim who, unfortunately, the apple did fall far from the tree, and the son of the Chavetz Chaim is forging letters saying that he's now in charge of the yeshiva, but the Chavetz Chaim in his own will, referring to this will, left the yeshiva to his grandsons, children of Reb Hirsch Levinson. He says, and the Reb Chaim Oizer writes, because we're talking about the Chavetz Chaim, I can't make this matter public because it would be a disgrace to the name of the Chavetz Chaim. So therefore, I'm writing to Rabbanim privately that they should know that it's still the yeshiva is still the way it always was, and we're following the tzava of the Chavetz Chaim. So this is the tzava of the Chavetz Chaim being doeg for the yeshiva to its very last.
Amazing. What's ironic is, as you mentioned, this was written in 1926. Chavetz Chaim dies 1933, and Naftali Trupp, who at the time of writing was still alive, dies before the Chavetz Chaim. 1930.
That's right. The very next lot is a rear letter from Naftali Trupp. Letters from Naftali Trupp, writings from Naftali Trupp are very rare, but they do have one written in 1927, 2 years before he died.
Lot 57 is Chiddushei Torah, handwritten signed by Rabbi Wasserman. Lot 56 is a handwritten letter by the Chazon Ish.
And maybe the most famous of the Chazon Ish's letters, because he writes there a very famous line, which is quoted and quoted and quoted again. He says to the person he's writing to, he says, I want you to be very happy, be joyous about your Torah knowledge and the fact that you're able to be Isaac about Torah and enjoy the Torah, because you should know. Iker ha'avoida b'simcha. These are immortal words. Iker ha'avoida b'simcha ki be'emes ein kol etzev ba'olam. I know Breslovers like this quote, but the Chazon Ish writes this. There's really no sadness in the world. L'misha makir oir ha'oiros shel ha'emes. If you are zoiche to recognize the light and the shine of truth, there's no more. That dispels all sadness. And he says, I know this myself personally. They didn't highlight that as well. But he says, v'nishmasi tivineu. My neshama has seen that Oyer Shel Emes. And that's why, even though the Chazon Ish had a very, very hard life, extremely difficult life, personal life, but he says there's really no sadness in the world. What a testament to the greatness of the Chazon Ish, and this is an immortal letter.
Lot 58 is a letter of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Menachem and Lishneerson, and this is a letter about yeshivas, and especially about Lubavitch yeshivas. And this letter was printed, it's printed in Igros Kodesh, the 4th volume, but it's a letter, it's typewritten, and it's signed by the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Lot 59 is, as Genazym writes, Mishloach Manas from the Ramah, Mechir Yain and Megillas Ezra, the first edition printed in Cremona, Italy. The Ramah famously writes in his introduction, couldn't send Shalach Manas. He has other Gedolim as well, I think Shlomo Al-Kabitz and others. Then, so he wrote this as Shalach Manas, and he sent this as Shalach Manas. So that's Mechir Yain, a famous commentary on Megillas Esther. Lot 60 is the palmistry, if it holds out of Amsterdam, all about Chochmas HaPartzuf, Kafayad, reading palms and those things. Lot 61 is a manuscript, a partial beautiful manuscript of Hamburg, the 18th century. Lot 63 is a one-of-a-kind, a beautiful copy printed special for the printer's wife of a set of Machzorim in Amsterdam, 1750, and it has her name on the cover. It's a beautiful, large Machzor.
So again, those who are interested in the trappings of the early printed Svarim and want to see, again, handcrafted beauty that you can't find today, this is a magnificent set of Machzorim because the binding, the clasps, the quality, the large paper, like we mentioned earlier, the more, the wealthier you were, the more paper you could afford. Your Sefer was printed on larger and larger paper. This is just a phenomenal and preserved and beautiful condition.
And if you look at the next lot, which is an exquisite, it really is, a carved wooden binding by the master craftsman of Tully Stern. This is 1879. You could see the binding with the clasp. I mean, imagine a binding and an exquisite, intricate wooden detail on a sefer. That's what this was. Lot 65 is the Amsterdam Community Regulation, 1737-1765 by the Ashkenazi community. So this is their regulations. Lot 66 is really a fascinating document. It's the Takanas of the first community of Fjorda, which is the famous Yeshiva Harama Befjorda, that Rabbi Hamburger has 3 big volumes. Fjorda was the yeshiva in Germany. So this was the community. This is 500 Takanos. For those that know about German communities especially, they would have many Takanos. There was the Kihila. That system doesn't exist anymore. And so there was a lot of things that was set out in this manuscript, Takana, this Takana ledger. Lot 67 is claims of the Jews to an equality of rights in a series of letters. And this was written by Isaac Leeser. Interestingly, Genazym wrote it says published by Rabbi Isaac Leeser. He actually wasn't a rabbi. He never claimed to be a rabbi. He was Chazan. Isaac Leeser, for all practical purposes, we think of a rabbi. Somehow today, every Joe Blow is a rabbi. He definitely would have been a rabbi.
If Isaac Leeser lived in Lakewood, he would be rabbi.
He'd be a Rabbi Goy, Hagadol. That's for sure. But it's just interesting to note when it pertains to Leeser himself, and this is early Americana. This is printed in Philadelphia, 1841. All of Leeser's books go for a lot. And then we have Lot 68 is a really interesting Haggadah, Pesach Haggadah, printed from Bordeaux in 1812. It's written and illustrated by Yaakov Tsoref.
And this also comes with pull-out maps, so it's has additional collector value.
Yeah, no, I said printed because this is a handwritten Haggadah and illustrated as well. So quite fascinating with the pull-out map. So all of this, Genazym, also we've been reading from a printed catalog. Many auctions today don't do printed catalogs anymore. Genazym still does a beautiful printed catalog, so you can check out the catalog. I think you can buy the catalog a few dollars, or you sign up, Genazym sends you the catalog. That itself is worth something to check out. Check out, again, Genazym, GENAZYM.com. A link to it in the show notes. You can sign up to register, to register to bid, place a bid. The auction, which again, highly recommend viewing because it's highly entertaining. That's Sunday, February 15th at 1 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. in Eretz Yisrael. And thank you to Genazym for sponsoring this episode. And thank you, Moshe, for joining me once again.
Such a pleasure, Nachi. Thanks. I enjoy the Genazym catalog, and I hope the listeners enjoy it as well. It's a little walk through history with a great little entertainment on the side.